The submitted material is a passionate commentary script analyzing the FCC's potential crackdown on Disney's ABC network and the view over equal time rules for political candidates. Streamlining the narrative focus around the core regulatory conflict will significantly amplify the impact of the comment.
Yeah, because while the creator's voice is definitely strong, the narrative right now acts kind of like a high-speed train taking a bunch of unnecessary off-ramps.
It really does. I mean, we are looking at a piece that has a ton of raw momentum, but it currently suffers from a tendency to, pull off onto dirt roads and navigate cul-de-sacs before getting back on the rail.
The momentum is evident, but the steering requires some immediate recalibration. And the weakness here is that the script frequently diverges into these completely unrelated personal grievances.
Right, like those extended tangents about paying high taxes as a small business owner in Pennsylvania.
Exactly. Or that whole paragraph essentially telling people to get off my lawn.
Oh, and we cannot forget the complaints about how people overshared on Facebook 15 years ago.
Yeah, those detours heavily dilute the primary thesis about the FCC, Disney, and their broadcast licenses.
They really do. I mean, the core subject matter, a potential federal action against a major media conglomerate, is inherently high stakes.
But when the narrative suddenly shifts to complaining about local state taxes, the stakes just completely evaporate.
Right. The creator is basically asking the audience to hold two completely different emotional weights at the same time. You have the macroscopic, corporate-level threat to Disney on one hand,
and then the microscopic, personal irritation of property taxes on the other. Is there a risk that focusing so heavily on personal tax frustrations might alienate the audience who tuned in specifically for the pop culture and media business analysis?
Absolutely. And that is exactly why the suggestion here is to prune these personal tangential rants entirely and redirect that emotional energy into deepening the analysis of the core broadcast versus streaming dichotomy.
Just cut them out completely?
Cut them out. The personality shouldn't be removed, but it has to be weaponized toward the actual topic.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? Give me a concrete example.
Well, these are just a few ways to tackle this, but for example, instead of ranting about Pennsylvania taxes right after mentioning the New York millionaire exodus, pivot immediately.
Pivot to what?
To how political polarization directly affects Disney's viewer demographics and their bottom line.
Oh, right. Because the material briefly touches on how the rich people pay most of the bills.
Exactly. Take that concept and discuss Disney's advertising. How does an FCC investigation impact ad revenue on The View?
That keeps the financial frustration relevant to the core thesis.
Exactly. And for another example, just cut that entire 15 years ago Facebook rant. Drop it.
Reclaim that airtime.
Right. Use that reclaimed airtime to detail why the FCC's equal time rule was originally created, giving the audience valuable historical context instead of personal frustration.
Wait, before we map out Disney's strategy, how exactly does the equal time rule weaponize a broadcast license in this specific context?
Like, if ABC puts a politician on their talk show, what is the actual mechanical trigger for the FCC that the creator needs to explain to the audience?
It comes down to Section 315 of the Communications Act.
Right.
The rule basically stipulates that if a U.S. broadcast station permits one legally qualified candidate for public office to use its facilities, it must afford equal opportunity to all other such candidates.
But there is a massive gray area, right, regarding what constitutes a bona fide newscast or a news interview.
Exactly. Which are exempt. And The View really straddles that line between entertainment and news.
So if the FCC decides a specific interview isn't a bona fide news event, but rather a platforming of a candidate, the clock starts ticking.
Right. The opposing candidate can demand equal airtime, and if the network refuses,
their federal license to broadcast on public airwaves is in jeopardy.
Exactly.
Which is exactly the mechanical explanation that needs to replace the Facebook rant.
Right. So now that the narrative off-ramps have been cleared, the script needs to ensure its core legal argument is structured correctly so the audience understands the stakes from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Reorganizing the broadcast versus streaming argument to appear earlier in the script will create a much stronger and more cohesive logical progression.
I completely agree. Because right now, the script explains the rules of the game after the game is already over.
That is a perfect analogy. It is like waiting until the very end of a story to explain the difference between renting an apartment from a strict landlord,
which represents broadcast television.
Right, versus owning your own house, which represents streaming.
And the weakness here is that this crucial distinction between network television regulations, those federal licenses, and streaming or cable freedoms like Hulu and HBO is buried near the very end of the script.
It is so far back, and because this legal reality is introduced so late, the earlier complaints about the FCC feel like generalized political grievances rather than a grounded, factual legal analysis.
The audience basically spends the first 10 minutes thinking this is just a story about political censorship.
Exactly. Without realizing there is a binding legal contract that ABC signed with the government.
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion if we brought it forward? What if we looked at it from the perspective of framing this entirely as a business strategy error by Disney from minute one?
Well, to do that effectively, the suggestion is to introduce the legal framework, the specific difference in federal licensing requirements, immediately after establishing the news of the FCC's potential crackdown.
Get it right up front.
Yes. So for a concrete example of how to implement this, you could move that specific, highly engaging point about moving the view to Hulu so Whoopi Goldberg can drop F-bombs up to the very beginning.
Oh, I loved that line. It perfectly illustrates the regulatory difference.
It really does. So put it right after mentioning the Bloomberg report.
And then what?
Then, as another example, use the Bill Maher HBO comparison in the first 3 minutes to establish the baseline of why ABC is in trouble while other networks aren't.
Which anchors the rest of the commentary in fact rather than emotion.
Exactly.
But let's unpack the mechanics of that public versus private pipeline for a moment. Because the creator really needs to make this distinction crystal clear.
Sure.
Why does the government have a say over ABC but not Hulu?
It relies on the concept of spectrum scarcity.
Right.
Broadcast television networks like ABC transmit their signals over the public electromagnetic spectrum.
Which is a limited resource.
Exactly. Because there is a limited amount of spectrum, the government licenses it out, and the trade-off is that broadcasters must serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity.
Whereas HBO and Hulu, on the other hand, do not use public airways.
Right. They are delivered via private, closed-loop systems, like cable wires or internet connections that you voluntarily subscribe to.
So because they don't utilize a scarce public resource, the FCC has virtually no jurisdiction over their content.
Precisely. And when you establish that baseline early, it fundamentally alters the stakes of the script.
It turns the hosts of the show from mere talk show participants into massive liabilities in a complex regulatory chess match.
Exactly. Which means with the legal argument successfully front-loaded, the creator now has the perfect foundation to elevate their political commentary into a highly original corporate analysis.
Oh, absolutely.
Grounding the political commentary in specific, actionable business implications for Disney will elevate the analysis far above standard internet punditry.
Because as I understand it from the notes, the argument right now is just that the political pendulum swings back and forth, right?
Yeah, but I have to push back on that. This is a point every single political commentator makes. The creator really needs to offer a proprietary angle that only they can provide.
Right. The weakness here is that the script leans way too heavily on generalized political clichés.
Things like pendulum swings, revenge tours, and standard left versus right complaints.
Which makes the creator sound like any generic talking head.
And it masks their obvious expertise in entertainment news.
That's fascinating. I wonder, though, if we've considered how focusing solely on the culture war aspect might overlook the fascinating boardroom dynamics at Disney that actually drive these decisions.
That is the exact thread we need to pull. The suggestion is to abandon the generic political framing and anchor the political speculation directly in Disney's recent corporate history and executive strategies.
To provide a uniquely valuable, business-focused perspective to the audience.
Precisely. So for concrete examples of how to do this, the creator should expand significantly on the brief. Excellent mention of Josh D'Amaro potentially replacing Bob Iger's approach.
Right. Detail exactly how this changing of the guard might alter Disney's willingness to fight the FCC.
Exact. Let's look at the mechanics of that executive succession for a second.
Sure.
Bob Iger's strategy has historically been very legacy-driven. He has shown a willingness to wade into political mud if he feels it protects Disney's image as a socially conscious brand.
But Josh D'Amaro comes from the Parks and Experiences division.
Right. And that division is incredibly capital-intensive. It relies heavily on cooperation with local municipalities.
And it is traditionally highly averse to regulatory friction.
Exactly. So if D'Amaro takes over, how does a parks-driven mindset influence a broadcast television crisis?
Will a numbers-driven executive view the View as a legacy asset worth protecting at all costs, or as an unnecessary regulatory headache.
That is the level of insight that transforms the script.
It really does.
And as a second concrete example, connect the Reedy Creek, Florida situation explicitly to Disney's legal playbook.
So instead of just stating they took a hit in Florida,
map out how their aggressive legal strategy there predicts exactly how they will handle this new threat in New York and LA.
Right, because let's look at the actual timeline in Florida. Disney spoke out on a piece of state legislation.
And the state government responded by moving to dissolve their special tax district.
But Disney did not back down. They sued the state, claiming First Amendment retaliation.
Right, arguing that the government was using regulatory power to punish protected speech. Now, look at the FCC threat. ABC hosts speak out. The federal government threatens their broadcast license.
If Disney relies on their established corporate behavior, they won't just quietly pay a fine. They will likely argue that the FCC's application of the equal time rule in this instance is, again, First Amendment retaliation.
Which means they might actively dare the FCC to revoke the license, sparking a Supreme Court battle over the constitutionality of Section 315 itself.
Exactly. By drawing a direct line between the special district fight in Florida and the broadcast license fight with the federal government, you create a predictive model for the audience.
That is high-level industry forecasting.
It turns the creator from an observer into an absolute authority on the subject. So, to quickly summarize the core takeaways for the listener today. First, streamline the focus by removing unrelated personal rants about taxes and social media.
Second, restructure the narrative by moving the crucial Hulu versus broadcast legal distinction to the front.
And finally, elevate the overall angle by focusing on Disney's corporate strategy rather than generic political pendulum swings.
Right, and in terms of actionable steps, you can implement these by completely cutting the Pennsylvania tangent, shifting the Bill Maher comparison to the intro, and fleshing out the boardroom implications of Josh D'Amaro's leadership.
We warmly invite the listener to implement these structural and thematic changes and to submit their revised work back in for another round of feedback in a future critique.